Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Townsend, editor of Place Northwest. Welcome to this dedicated event on what next for the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Savills, Kratos, Cowgills and VU.CITY. I'm sure that many of you by now may have attended our virtual events and become familiar with the Remo platform. It's a superb that enables the networking and buzz of a physical event while still keeping everyone safe. But a quick bit of housekeeping for those of you less familiar with it. The networking opportunity is really the big difference of Remo when compared to other platforms such as Zoom. So please do create your own profile so that when someone clicks on you, they can read who you are and what you do. And don't be shy, turn on your cameras, let people see you. And then that all enables the sort of natural networking experience that you'd get at a physical event. To move around the room, just double click on a table and you'll be taken straight there where you can video chat with other guests. There's also private messaging through the chat button and the Q&A function where you can direct questions to our panelists that will weave into our discussion. On that note, I hope you've enjoyed some of the networking in the main room in the last half an hour or so. We've got 150 registered guests, so it's a great opportunity to build contacts and really get under the skin of today's topic. So, the GMSF. It's a complex yet crucial topic for the city region that has seen so many twists and turns. It's well worth our focused attention and the input of the expert speakers that we have with us today. The latest significant change the plan has seen, of course, since it was first drafted in 2016, is the departure of Stockport Council towards the end of last year, which has prompted the remaining 9 authorities to club together to bring forward an alternative framework called Places for Everyone. So the first panel of this event will focus on strategy for Places for Everyone, including the GMSF story so far, what needs to happen next, and the likely content of the new framework. The second panel is about the plan in practice, the process of putting it together and the logistical and bureaucratic issues involved in delivering it. In between the two sessions, there's a networking break plus half an hour's networking at the end of the event, so you can continue doing business and making contacts. So without further ado, let's kick off. I'd like to welcome to the stage Councillor Angeliki Stoya, Executive Member for Environment, Planning and Transport at Manchester City Council, Rachel Ainscough, Group Managing Director at Ainscough Group, Steve Quartermain, ex-Chief Planner at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, Jeremy Hines, Director at Savills, and Julian Seymour, Managing Director of Planning Communication at Kratos. If our speakers could please activate their cameras and mics if they haven't done so already. And to our audience, please do remember to submit questions through the Q&A button and we'll get to those, we'll weave those into our conversation as we go along. Welcome everyone. I think you're all here.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
Welcome, thanks for joining us today. Steve, I'd like to start with you if that's okay. First of all, what are the issues Greater Manchester has been grappling with over the past few years, do you think, with regard to the GMSF? And after the journey it's been through, which is quite a journey, why is a joint plan really needed? Should we tackle that one from the outset?
Good morning, everybody. I'll give some context to that if I can, Sarah. I mean, the government's been committed to a plan-led system. Having a plan is important, and it's put in place a number of opportunities for councils to plan together. So either through combined authorities or joint plans and the like. And it's very keen that it supports that, and that the benefits of working together to get a bigger picture of the local is recognised. I think it's obvious, isn't it? But I will say that the reason the government thinks that a plan-led system is important is that it enables you to plan for the infrastructure that you need, get the right development in the right place at the right time. I know that's a bit of a planning cliche, but it remains to be true. And it also gives investors and developers confidence that they can actually come to an area and actually know that they can get their schemes away. And I think that if you look at what's happened, is that this has proved more challenging than in lots of places than the government perhaps anticipated, and over reliance on perhaps the duty to cooperate to actually deliver it. And I think that one of the things we'll talk about perhaps in this first panel is why the issues about how to deliver a plan have led to more difficulties than perhaps was originally thought.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Steve. Rachel from Ainscough Group, you can probably give some sort of on the ground context really to add to Steve's points as a sort of on the development side, land promotion side. You mentioned before this event that Ainscough hasn't actually done much in Greater Manchester since 2015 because of this lack of a coherent plan. Why is this? And can you tell us more about that and what you make of the situation so far?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Steve, obviously, for good planning, proper planning and housing delivery in a sort of plan-led way, you need a plan. And as Steve said, it provides developers, promoters with the confidence they need to invest in that area, that, there is some surety that their schemes will come forward. And you're exactly right. Unfortunately, since GMSF came about, we haven't done any business in the area. And that has been quite an active decision. And it's a shame because, we're a national business. We operate across the country, but we're based in Greater Manchester, in Wigan. We've done a lot of business sort of nearby in Cheshire and what have you. But unfortunately, because of the sort of state of flux, there just hasn't been enough confidence for us. There's too much unknown, and we need that clarity to be able to say, okay, it warrants investment in that area. So yeah, I think obviously it depends what type of developer you are. So we tend to work family housing, the more traditional type of homes. Obviously, if you are a developer building apartments in the city centre, you've probably had a totally different experience of the past 5 years. But looking at traditional family homes, it's incredibly difficult when there isn't local plans coming forward. I think I'm right in saying there's only 3 local plans been adopted post NPPF within Greater Manchester, and that's quite stark. So for us, unfortunately, until there is some clarity in terms of the way forward, it's probably not somewhere that we'd be that keen to invest. We absolutely are, but we just need that clarity, and that comes from local plan progress.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Rachel. I think that's really interesting, and really shows some of the impact on the ground, doesn't it? And also raises the question about how actually in this next chapter of the process, there's going to have to be a lot of working out how this works alongside the building of local plans as well. And obviously Stockport will now be building its own plan. And
sure.
So, yeah. Jeremy from Savills, do you agree with this? Have you seen that the lack of a joint plan has affected the volume of speculative development applications coming in for Greater Manchester? What's it meant for sort of green belt and industrial and other kinds of sites? Has it been sort of different depending on what sector the development's in?
No, not in that sense. I mean, just to echo partly Steve's overture about the necessity for a plan. I mean, we can't escape the legal requirement. There is a need for a plan, and the government has added to that legal requirement by giving impetus to the need for local plans to be completed by the end of December 2023. So there is an essence of imperative to get something produced, and I think that provides some of the context for the later conversation we'll be having about the plan of the 9, as you called it earlier. With regard to the lack of a plan and it having a negative impact on development, I don't think I'm experiencing that. There's always people who are going to come in and fill a void, so to speak. And but equally, I think one of the attributes of Manchester's development framework, and I mean that's in a non-policy or political sense, but in a collaborative sense between the public and the private sectors, there has been a good solid history of cooperation between the two sectors, and actually although that was led initially by Manchester City as a council, and a lot of the work about the collaborative arrangements between the two sectors were laid there, you know, all the other boroughs played their role in fomenting a successful sort of Manchester brand, as it were, in that sense. And I think the need for a plan then began to take on a life of its own. And I think people were looking to the plan to replace the framework that had otherwise been created informally between the two sectors. And so the absence of that more formalised framework, I think it has been off-putting to the likes of Ainscow and so on, because the nature of the working relationships has to change, and there hasn't been an ability to fill that gap because the GMSF has simply slowed down and now has to find a new course. So I think that's my sort of headline take on it, really.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. That's really good context. Julian, I wonder, sort of, in your view, and you know, not trying to sort of do any sort of Stockport bashing by any means. In your view, though, how problematic was it for one council, whoever it might be, to pull out? Will it still be possible for the 9 boroughs to reallocate housing targets and identify strategic sites without them?
Yeah, I think it certainly will be. I think actually Stockport was taking a bit less than its allocated share in any case. So actually, the remaining boroughs will be able to reallocate and potentially reduce their greenbelt taken overall, with Stockport actually potentially taking more greenbelt sites, which could be a problem for them. But I understand why they did it. It's completely fair. I think what part of the problem is something we might come on to a bit later, about the way that Manchester was set up, that this decision had to be a unanimous decision. And obviously, just one council pulling out can cause problems for all the rest. But planning is one of the key issues for councillors. It's one of the key things they can control within their boroughs. So if you're Stockport, if you're Oldham, if you're anyone else, you have to make sure that you're in control of that. So I totally understand the Stockport position.
Okay, thanks, Julian. And you know, yeah, you're confident then that, you know, it is going to be possible for the 9 to deliver a plan together that will be successful.
Well, absolutely. I think that they've made good progress already. I think they've got lots of the evidence base in place. It's just going to cause a delay. And as Jeremy said earlier, there may be that Stockport come in again later. We'll just have to see. But I think there's a really good chance that there's a political will now to push forward. Okay.
Great, thanks, Julian. Okay, so we've had a bit of sort of context of the situation. So, Angeliki, Councillor Angeliki, is you know, you're our borough representative really in the room. You're at the coalface of the next steps of the journey. Can you bring us up to speed with where Places for Everyone is right now, and what are the key things the 9 authorities are looking to address when putting the new plan together, and how does that sort of tie in with your own priorities for Manchester?
Okay, first of all, I wanted to talk about the necessity of the plan, and I do agree with what the speakers have said. It is important that we move forward with the Places for Everyone, and I'd like to say from the outset that the door is open for Stockport to when they decide, sort of from us, at least, to come in. And perhaps we can discuss the politics of that sort of later on. But it is important, it is necessary for us to have a plan, because first of all, it's important to have something to underpin Greater Manchester's plan for recovery from the coronavirus pandemic, and to give confidence, like Rachel said, for people that we have identified what it is that we want to do where in the conurbation. It is critical to have the plan because it supports the delivery of the Greater Manchester strategy, and also it provides, if you like, a framework to manage growth in a sustainable and also in an inclusive way, which has come sort of very, very strongly in the sort of, if you like, rewrite of the latest iteration of the GMSF, and avoid unplanned development and development also by appeal, and we have seen a couple of cases sort of on that. We want to align the delivery also of development with infrastructure proposals and meet the requirement for local authorities to have a plan by December 2023. And the last thing is the duty, if you like, to cooperate between sort of the local authorities. So we are making progress. There's a lot of work which is being done in the background, and the work has been somewhat interrupted, as you can understand, as all of the local authorities are battling with the coronavirus pandemic, which has thrown a lot of things at us. I mean, you know, in the last month, we had to do in Manchester surge testing in Moorside, Hume, Whalley Range, Fallowfield. We're also doing now surge testing in the north of the city around Moston. So it is a very, very sort of unpredictable area that we're in. But given that, we want to give confidence to people, and obviously we are open for business. The market, our planning department is always busy, and we are seeing that there is confidence in the future of the city. So the remaining districts have requested to nominate, if you like, representatives for the new joint committee that will be overseeing the places for everyone. I think this meeting is scheduled perhaps after the next elections or soon as after the local elections. We are going through the review of housing allocations as a result of the government amended calculation. As you will know, that the annual sort of target increase from 10,534 to 11,384 is presenting us challenges in Manchester, because we've got the extra 35%. So we are looking to, so we were going to be delivering 2,613. Sort of little post-it note here in front of me to get the numbers right. And now we got to do 3,527, and we're going through a process to identify these sites. So in order to retain the status of a development plan, I think what is key is that the proposed changes to the places for everyone must result in the plan having substantially the same effect. And this is, I think, where we are going to be working towards, as the GMSF 2020 would have had. So only minor changes are, sort of, if you like, allowed, and we are foreseeing. So the changes that we are foreseeing coming forward are indirect result of Stockport living, obviously. Then also in result to government policy, the new government sort of allocations, and then also we're going to be looking at new evidence. So, for example, the natural sort of England Commons post October 2020 will need to also be sort of taken into account. I think that we're looking to revise and move on with finalising the plan by June, before we go out to public consultation, and then our Manchester, if you like, local plan, we're working on that at the same time, and we are hoping to have a consultation around about the same time so that we can do that sort of in parallel. There's different consultations for both. I think one is section 19, one is section sort of 18 for the geekiest among us, but we are planning to move forward ASAP. We know that there's a lot to do, and it is very, very high on our priority list.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. And it sounds like okay, so you've got your time frame set, and yes, you've put some quite sort of tight time frames on sort of getting the first sort of drafts together and things. But it sounds like there will have to be a few changes because of this sort of additional government policy that's come in since the last one was put together. Okay. So perhaps we can now explore in a bit more detail what places for everyone then might include, because housing is one thing, as you've mentioned. It's to tackle the housing challenge across the boroughs, and particularly in the context of the government's new housing delivery test. Steve, I wonder if you can give us your thoughts on what the likely impact of this might be, particularly the presumption policy underpinning this. How might that affect the drafting of the new plan, not just for Manchester, but for all of the councils?
Yeah, I think it's important, and in some ways, we've all talked about the benefits of having a plan, and I think there's some common feeling there. But the consequences of not having a plan is also partly answering your question. You've got a housing delivery test, which is talking about how people are performing. And if you look at the 2020 results for the Manchester authorities, actually as a whole, they over-provided, they over-delivered. But yet the housing delivery test, because it's a retrospective measure, looking back at the plans and looking back at the individual plans and looking at whether they're up to date, whether they're providing the figures, you find that despite the fact that across the authorities they over-provided, you end up with 3 authorities with a presumption, and that's Trafford, Bury and Bolton, one with an action plan, which is Thameside, and one with a buffer, which is Oldham. I didn't include Stockport for obvious reasons. So unless they do something different, then you're going to find that despite the fact that houses are being built, you're going to get caught with a housing delivery test, which seems to suggest that people are not delivering the houses that are needed. And for me, that's just such an obvious sort of next step, is to say, well, actually, if we all work together and look at these figures as a whole, then Manchester as a whole can deliver. And when you then add on top of that the fact that Manchester City's got to have this, as Angelica says, 35% additional provision. You put on top of that the need to arise to the climate change challenge. And if you're going to have a different approach to the way in which infrastructure is provided, I'm talking about heating and electricity and trying to hit a carbon neutral by 2025 and beyond. It's a real challenge, and I think that's why I want to emphasise why a joint plan is such an obvious way forward. And I think it's these challenges which need to drive the agenda. And I think that all the elected members of all the various authorities should see that this is in their benefit of actually working together to achieve this bigger picture approach to development in Manchester, whereas individually they're going to find it more difficult. And I think that was following on from all the previous comments, I really wanted to emphasize that as sort of why they should do the plan and how important it is to get this in place.
But do you think this is going to be sort of a major sort of additional challenge, these targets, then in actually drafting the new places for everyone, or do you think it was always it was kind of always a challenge? And
I think it was always a challenge, to be honest, and I think you'll find it's it's a challenge up and down the country. It's a challenge in the southeast. It's going to be a challenge in the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. It is a challenge, but the belief that I've always held, which is why I've always worked in this area, is the local government has the skills and ability to take those decisions and can actually do this. One of the things that I've often sort of pushed back when people have said when I was in central government, will the government tell us what to do? And I would say, well, you actually are in a position to make those decisions yourself. You can make those decisions locally. You can make those decisions in combination with your partners, your adjacent authorities. You don't need the government to tell you. And what I think we found is the government have increasingly stepped into that space because people are not actually rising to that challenge. And I think that we need to see this as a real opportunity rather than a challenge. It has its challenges, but it's an opportunity for local people to take local decisions which can really engage with the community about how they're going to take the place forward.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Steve. Now, we've had quite a few questions in from the audience, which is brilliant. So let's just take a pause and address some of those. In fact, the top one was actually going to be my next question anyway, so that's rather serendipitous. Paul Boyfield, what impact might the forthcoming planning bill, perhaps arriving early this summer and bringing a new local plan system, have on the process? I wonder if, Jeremy, you'd like to tackle that one. To add to that, councils will be able to designate plots for development requiring only light touch planning. So I wonder how that will change things and whether that will help or hinder delivery of quality development, do you think?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. My suspicion is that the changes to the plan making part arising from the reforms to the planning, if they do come forward, won't actually affect too much the strategic nature of plan making. Because if you look at the introductory sections to the white paper as well, for example, the government does accept that the role of planning remains quite wide-reaching. It's not just about creating design code. You know, it's still about, and this is generally speaking, he is still saying that planning is about creating places for people, combating climate change, improving biodiversity, etc. All the things that the GMSF 2020 sets out, and which the Places for Everyone document continues to set out, as we just heard from Angelica. So in that sense, there remains considerable overlap at the strategic level of what GMSF 2020 stroke Places for Everyone is seeking to achieve, and what the government itself sets out as one of the roles, or the role of the planning system. Then later in the reform sections for planning, the white paper continues to emphasise the need for strategic planning, and how actually mayors and combined authorities will take on more enhanced roles. So actually, I don't think from a strategic level we could see many changes. I think where the changes will apply will be more at local plan level, but that will only happen after local plans have been adopted throughout the country anyway. So I'm relaxed about that, and the government itself has got a long way to go on some of its reforms as well. So I don't think the fact that we know there are reforms in the pipeline and that there are changes downstream should be seen in any way as a deterrent to do what the 9 local authorities have decided to do, and I think they should be encouraged. Just a couple of riders on that, though. I hope Angelica's commentary in relation to Stockport come true, but the problem I suspect is if they don't come true soon, it'll be too late, because the plan and I have to move on. You know, as I said, there is an impetus. So actually, although Angelica's made a great request there to Stockport, it is for Stockport to come back to, and there isn't long for them to do that, because everybody's going to have to go and sail their own boats. So it'll be difficult if Stockport don't respond soon on that. And the second thing is that in response to an observation Julian correctly made, that the way the system was set up would require the unanimous approval of all authorities. The route I think that the 9 have gone down, which is to create a development plan document, still has very sound statutory basis. So there was another route available to them. So it does mean that, and I'm going to echo again Angelica's geekiness point, I'm afraid, which is that you've got the schedules to the 2004 Planning Act. You do have the abilities under those schedules to create a statutory document as a development plan document, and I can see that it's a very neat way out of a problem that was otherwise made by for shorthand, the Localism Act of 2011. So it's good, and I think we ought to be encouraged as Greater Mancunians that the 9 have found a path to forge together, and if Stockport want to come on board, then that's great too. But I say the window is very narrow and narrowing, and so it's up to them really. But I don't think that the changes to the reform process themselves in any way are a deterrent to continuing the path that is now being taken by the authorities.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. I'd like to just briefly get Rachel's view on that before we tackle some of the other audience questions. Are you looking forward to proposed lighter touch planning regulations, Rachel, or would you, as an investor, prefer more sort of structure, more certainty?
I think. Well, firstly, I completely agree with Jeremy in that. One, I think there's quite a long way to go with the reform, so hopefully. The plan of 9 will have progressed sort of in advance anyway, and hopefully this is something that the local plans that hang off the back of it may have to tackle, but I completely agree it should not be a reason to slow down, which is great that it seems like it's not, so that's good. In sort of general terms, from a planning reform point of view, the idea of having more certainty, more consistency across the country, it is absolutely good news. We are completely behind that. I think, like everybody, our nervousness about what's been proposed so far is just really how it is possible. So how so much upfront work will be done as part of that local plan process. Who funds that? How on earth it's going to be done in the timescales that are currently being talked about? Bearing in mind, the local plans at the moment, although they may look like a lot more detailed, there's not as much that sits behind it as would be needed. If you're going to be granting effectively an outline consent on the back of, let's call it an allocation for ease, then there has to be a lot of work that sits behind that. And my worry about that is, who is funding it? Where is the resource coming from? That obviously puts a lot of upfront risk on companies like us, who would normally work to get sites allocated, but the significant investment comes post-allocation, or at least post-draft allocation. So to be front-loading all that potentially is quite a concern. And if it's not the developers funding it, I don't know who is, because I think the local authorities are going to struggle to do that themselves. And as I've already said, the timescales within which they're going to be expected to do that, don't see how it's going to be possible. So although the principle I think is fantastic, I just worry about the mechanics, and maybe when the detail comes out that will all make a lot more sense. So let's wait and see. But as it stands, I'm really not sure how it will be deliverable.
Sure. Okay. Thanks,
Yeah,
Rachel.
I'll comment on that as well.
Of course. Yeah, please.
I totally agree with everything Rachel said. I think from a developer point of view, it can already be a bit of a bun fight at allocation time, everyone fighting for their share of the pie. And I think, as you said, that's going to be brought forward, and there's got to be lots of consultation. And one thing that is in the new proposals is a lot of consultation. Similarly with the Building Beautiful agenda, there's a lot of consultation. What does beautiful look like? What's a design guide look like? And one of the things that local people frequently worry about is not being, and there's a question about it in the chat on the Q&A about what local people want, and how's that brought into the system if you're going from zero straight to effectively an outline permission, whereas they may have a few more bites of the cherry in the current system with the allocation and the outline and the reserve matters. So there may be issues for the public feeling that they've been, and actually councillors, I'd be interested in Angelica's views on it, but there may be a few issues about the democracy of the system.
Okay, thanks, Julian. Now let's address Tim Field's question. With such a focus on avoiding greenbelt loss, does the panel think this puts more pressure on creating sustainable places within the built-up area? And the last draft of the GMSF slashed proposed greenbelt released by 60%, I think it was, from the 2016 version. So yeah, this is an interesting question. Will there still be a focus on brownfield development over greenfield? I wonder if Angelica would like to answer that one.
Thank you. When we consulted on the Manchester reset, which is a strategy for the City Council, the key priorities, the environment has come one of the top 3 priorities for our Manchester residents. So rightly so, I think we are looking to avoid building on the green belt. And also rightly so, we're coming together as local authorities to see how best we can square this circle and provide homes that are desperately needed for a growing city. And the question there is, how are we going to do it if we're not going to be putting them on the green belt? So the Places for Everyone plan, building on GMSF, we said that we're going to look at town centres and that people like urban living, and that we are going to be bringing forward more development across the local authorities in that fashion. However, it is a very, very big point, democracy, and it is the city centre is a place where lots of people want to live. It is a place where families want to live. It is a place where young people want to live increasingly. So yes, there will be pressures in the city centre, and also we need to square that with the fact that the city is the regional employment centre as well. And we need to have the ability to have a say on where we're going to be building apartments and where we're going to be keeping sites and places as office space. And this is where I worry with regards to the finer detail of the proposals that are coming from the government and what the government is going to decide. Because I agree with Jeremy in terms of the overall sort of, if you like, strategy, and I don't think that the new planning reforms are perhaps going to impinge on that very, very much. However, on the granular level, also to link in the question around democracy, it is very, very important for people to have a say and to be properly cited. And some of the proposals that I've seen, they're saying that we need to make things more digital. Yes, we all have digital systems for the planning process. But we also want people to be able to participate, because a significant omission in that section is any acknowledgement that quite a few of our local communities that are impacted by these developments do not have equal access to digital technology, for example. And this is absolutely, there's nothing around this over there. But also there are proposals to shorten the time that planning applications are out for consultation. Now that's another bonkers of decision, because it is true. I mean, we know that it works both ways. We need our residents to be able to respond, and when they see something, to take the opportunity and to play the role as a citizen, to take part into the planning process. But also, we need to be able to give them the information and to have a way to digest it. I think also that the challenge is that we need to build understanding, I think a little bit more understanding of the planning process, because it's a quasi, like, judicial, legal sort of process. And I do think that there's the devil's on the detail with regards to what is coming forward from the government. But yes, there will be more pressure on creating sustainable places within the built-up urban area, and we will have also the challenge of retrofitting these new homes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Angelica, while you're... Sorry, Steve.
Oh, so I was going to quickly add to that. So
Sure.
Tim's question is a really good one, and it needs to be related to the overarching approach the government has been pushing about building up, making better use of the existing urban capacity. And I think that there's not only is this being, you can see this being delivered through their approach to permitted development rights and building up in urban areas. I think it was only last week when there was this idea that street by street you'll be able to vote for a building up approach if 65% of the people vote for it. Now, I think Angelica's absolutely right. The granularity of detail here needs to be worked through about how people are going to get engaged with this. Is this about just making people better off by allowing them to extend their houses, or is this about delivering the houses that the country needs for the people that can't afford them? And I think that there's an issue about recognising that the existing urban areas of our cities can have more capacity for growth, and I think they can build up. But that comes back to my earlier point about that's why it's so important for people to work together, because yes, there may be some greenbelt release and you should do that through a local plan, but it's quite legitimate to say, but have you really looked at what the urban capacity is, and can you make more of that? And I think that's, again, echoes the importance of a joint plan, a joint approach.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Jeremy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to, in part, say something similar to the point Steve finished on about the need for a joint approach, because a further answer to the question that began this part of the conversation, building upon Angelica's response, it is to acknowledge that a Greater Manchester-wide approach, as set out in GMSF 2020, which we know is going to be echoed fully in places for everyone, is about rebalancing the Greater Manchester economy as well, and looking at ways by which the competitiveness of the southern areas can be maintained whilst improving the competitiveness and the economy of the northern areas. So And that broad approach of the GMSF echoes the broad approach at national political level, which is to rebalance the economy anyway and the levelling up agenda. So I don't think there's anything unique in the GMSF in its desire to achieve that outcome, albeit that is at the sub-regional level. And in doing so, that framework provides an answer to the questioner about how can you create more development in the established urban areas while still preserving the green belt, and that is a significant part of the answer, is to level up those areas of the Greater Manchester economy that need levelling up without ambushing those parts of the that are doing well, and that can only be achieved through a strategic-wide working together document.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy.
Can I just
Now, could I? Sorry, I'm going to have to move it on because we've got Councillor David Mellor, Stockport's Cabinet Member for Economy and Regeneration, in the audience, and he's happy to answer a couple of questions about Stockport's own position. So Rachel, and yeah, we'll come back after. We'll have sort of 5 minutes talking to Councillor Mellor, and then we'll come back. And there's lots of very interesting conversations as well from the audience that we've not yet addressed. So hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end. But David, if you'd like to join us on the speaker stage for a few minutes.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel like the black sheep in the room, I must be honest. But yeah, it's good to be here this morning, and it's been a really interesting conversation, and it's really sort of quite interesting to hear that I guess the window of opportunity for Stockport is potentially still open. But I guess we'll touch on that a bit more shortly.
Yeah, thank you, David. So I've got two questions for you, and we can answer those for a few minutes. First, is the council predicting any impact, positive or negative, on development potential in the borough from its decision to go it alone?
It's a good question, and I think, you know, the points have already, I think been highlighted really. I think what Rachel said earlier was really interesting, in that you know, that they, you know, in terms of who she's with, you know, they've held back in coming into Greater Manchester because of the situation that we found ourselves and the uncertainty. And obviously, you know, in terms of Stockport, that is a risk, because there is at the moment uncertainty there in terms of where we are progressing. I mean, we have had sort of assurances that the other opposition groups are committed towards working to a local plan. But of course, there's committing to it, and then there's getting to that final point, I think, at the end. So I think you know, that's been reassuring. But of course, there is the uncertainty there. That there's no way to hide it. And I think certainly in terms of the position the council took, it's not the position I wanted. I think I'm sort of quite clear on that. But with the position is where we are at the moment, and we have to make it work. So I think in terms of what Rachel said, that was a key point. But I mean, the other side of the coin, I guess, is, you know, I mean, it was interesting what was said before about the potential for speculative development, because we are now seeing planning applications coming in on the proviso that they can now, some developers can come in and legitimately, you know, they feel like they've got the, I guess the cards in their hands to come in and get developments onto the green belt. There's a particular development which was, I think, put on, you know, you had an article on it just yesterday, Sarah, in my patch actually, on Ladybridge Road round there. So it's very difficult to gauge at the moment what the impacts will be. I think, like I said, they've been touched on really this morning. But yeah, I mean, what's quite clear is that we do need to continue working towards a plan, because if we don't, then certainly it's not only going to affect Stockport, but it will affect Greater Manchester as a whole. Because I think regardless of I guess us currently going it alone, just touching on that duty to cooperate, if we're going to look at getting infrastructure in place that's going to benefit the whole of Greater Manchester, we still need to be in those conversations, I guess, regardless of the position that we take. So it's difficult to say. For some developers, they might think, wow, this is a fantastic opportunity. It could bring lots more development in, because I guess they've got the potential to get developments through far more easily. But of course, that is something I don't want. It needs to be planned. It needs to be structured. We need to have you know, we need to have that cooperative working together. And of course, you know, that is still what I sort of certainly want to be working towards with the other 9. Indeed, I'm delighted the plan of the 9 is still going ahead. It's the absolute right thing that needs to happen for Greater Manchester, and I'm glad that's still happening. I guess whether, you know, if we were to come back into it, whether that would hold things up or not. And I know that I was interested there. It is a very, very tiny, I guess, window, if at all possible. The last thing I think that we would want to do is hold back the plan of the 9, and also it would potentially jeopardize what we're doing. So it's still quite a delicate situation. And I think at the moment that what we're doing is we're working with what we've got. We're working towards getting a local plan in place, but equally we will work as much as we can, and you know, we haven't left Greater Manchester. We're still in Greater Manchester. You know, some have compared this to our version of Brexit, I suppose, which is a horrible analogy, but it's quite apt, I think, in some respects. And you know, we're still here, and I'm still very, very keen that we work together, because ultimately we have to, through the duty to cooperate and to deliver our shared aims across Greater Manchester.
Thanks, David. My second question was, do you think there'll be any development consequences for the rest of Greater Manchester, which you've sort of touched on. So I'm going to bring in a question from the audience, which I think would be quite interesting to direct to you, and that's Stockport found itself under pressure due to certain specific proposals, specific sites and specific politics as well. Now, what our audience is saying, what is to say other boroughs won't find similar pressures as they advance? From your own experience, do you think that is a potential concern, or not a concern, but you know, something that they might have to tackle?
Again, that's a really good question. I mean, I think what we've found obviously is that I think with Stockport, shall we say, politically, it's quite colourful in Stockport politically, in terms of the makeup of the council. And I think certainly with other councils within Greater Manchester, there's the benefit where I guess you've got a much more unified council, to put it like that. So I think that the politics in Stockport did make the spatial framework quite difficult. And indeed, I think some of the criticisms that have come out through this, the conversations we've had with opposition leaders, have been quite genuine, I think. I think certainly, for example, with some of our independents, they felt that it was lacking that aspect of listening to the community and listening to immediate communities. And I thought, well, that's probably quite a fair comment, really. So I think there is always a risk with this. I think with planning, it naturally pitches neighbour against neighbour, doesn't it, really? And at times councillor against councillor, ward against ward. So there is always that potential, I think, for conflict, and for differences to come to the fore. I guess that's what it is. That's the nature of planning, I suppose. But I think the fact that the plan of the 9 does have universal buy-in, and there is that leadership there, or certainly the idea of it anyway has that universal buy-in, and that support is vitally important. I'm sure there may be bumps along the way. You know, I guess that's the nature of what's been wanting to be achieved, and the ambition of it. And again, it's that ambition that really excites me about the plan of the 9, and that's why I was so disappointed that the plan of the 10 didn't, shall we say, go forward. So I guess there is those possibilities, but I think the fact that the 9 are so unified and wanting to go forward with this, I think the urgency as well in needing to go forward with this to get a plan in place in time, that ticking clock may be something that works to the benefit of this. The fact that there is that urgency and it needs to be done in a quick space of time might help. But yeah, I think the nature of planning and the world that we're in, there's always going to be some bumps along the way, I think.
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Councillor Mellor. Really appreciate your agreeing to speak at this event, and hopefully you can stay around for the networking break and answer any further questions that our delegates may have. Thank you so much. Okay, we'll return to our panel. I noticed a question actually about, is it time to detach plan making from conflicted local politics then? And you know, perhaps easier said than done. But maybe Angelica, would you like to tackle that, and maybe, you know, it'd be interesting to hear your response in general to some of the things that Councillor Mellor said.
Thank you. I mean, this is my personal view. I thought that the Stockport's, if you like, decision was party politics, basically. So I think in kind of like these places, like Stockport, for example, perhaps Bolton also. Stockport is thousands of homes short of meeting the housing need, and it has been confirmed by the ministers that if they're not allowed, they're not able to identify their housing allocation, then they cannot defend planning applications. Therefore, will mean that anywhere in the green belt, they can't defend saying no to developers that want to bring in applications, and at appeal stage, we have seen some of these applications sort of approved by the Secretary of State. So I think the Lib Dem, if you like, strategy of telling publicly that they're defending the green belt, at the same time defending a policy that will lead to massive green belt building being built on, I thought this is sort of slightly terrifying. And I think the other thing that we haven't touched on is the risk of not moving forward with the plan, the places for everyone. It will be our ability to access significant, substantial amounts of funding from the government for schemes that we already have on the pipeline in the rest of Greater Manchester in terms of moving forward. And this is another reason for us to carry on moving forward and agreeing the plan. And this money is at risk on whether we have an effective, if you like, plan for the conurbation. So for me, it is very, very close to local sort of to politics in Stockport, and for me, it was the wrong decision. So in terms of decoupling the development and planning from local politics, I don't think that this can happen, because houses are very political. Building places for people is very political, and everyone has got an interest in it. And I think we need more people to come forward and tell us, help us answer this question. Where do you build, and how do you build good quality places for people? And also, how do you what's the best way to bring sort of forward development, and how can we engage people at the start of the planning process at putting together spatial, putting together development frameworks? Because let's face it, most of the people, I've seen that as a local councillor, I've seen it in this role, when the diggers are out and they started to build the houses, this is when most people say, well, what happened? What happened? I wasn't consulted. I didn't live here. And we know that, Manchester is a city where sort of people move around. We've got established communities, but we also have got new communities. So, it is a challenge. This is why we want more developers to be talking more to communities. This is why we want more voices as we are building in our vision for the different parts of the city. We want people engaged, and we want them to come along with us on this journey, but it works both ways. We want engaged citizens, and it's up to us as local councillors and up to you as developers, as businesses, to engage with the people that you need to engage, so that your applications also have got higher likelihood of success.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Julian, I wonder if you'd like to answer this top question at the moment. There seems to be a disconnect between the professional players in this process, councils, planners, developers, and the concerns of the average citizen. Angelica's touched on this and how it is challenging to link all of that up. What would you suggest in terms of how that could be resolved?
Unfortunately, I don't think it ever will be resolved. I think there's always going to be a tension there. I think that the average citizen is understandably nervous when you're saying, I'm going to build 100, 200, 2,000 houses somewhere near you, particularly if it's in the green belt. And if you actually start speaking to people, you find out that some of the concerns are about infrastructure, it's road, health, things which councils don't necessarily actually have the ability to change. So the healthcare system has become divorced from the planning system. There is no, the CCGs kind of they don't plan at the same time as the local plan. So it's very difficult for developers to address the concerns of the average citizen on those fronts. Roads can be very difficult, very expensive, as we've already talked about. It can be that multiple developers need to contribute to a new road, and that can be quite difficult, or it could be the tramway, or all those sorts of things. So there are lots of different issues to be addressed, and the tensions are, I think, always going to be there. I think what we can do is to talk about those and understand those, and the plan making process, and particularly at strategic level, is the place to do that, because you can start looking at a wider area. I think the government has actually started to try and address it with the Building Beautiful agenda. I'm not sure they've got quite there yet. That's just one aspect of it. But the Building Beautiful, obviously, they understand that if you're building schemes which are deemed to be objectively more attractive, then people are going to be more accepting. I don't think that resolves any of the social issues, but you can see why Building Beautiful could be helpful. I think from developers that leads to some nervousness. What does beautiful look like? Because to me it might look like one thing, to you it might look like something else. So how do we actually square that circle? And I know particularly one councillor we were talking to said, well, I objectively really like mock Tudor houses with timber frames. I'm fairly sure that's not everybody's view of what beautiful is. So how do you actually how do you put that all together? The other bit is, how do you put it into the planning system, and how do you resource it? And I think that's one of the other things that probably is an ongoing issue with councils, particularly when they're being asked to do more and more on everything else with less and less. So there are lots of issues, but I don't think we can ever resolve fully the tension between the players in the process, as the question asks, and the public.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Julian. We've got just a few minutes left for a couple of other questions. Now, some of the questions here, just to our audience, they're, some of them more sort of practical, how-to kind of questions. I think we could probably answer in the second session, which will be very much about sort of, implementation and processes. So I'm going to take Lucy Warwork's question, which is, given the hints of a backlash against city centre living as a result of COVID working from home trends, brackets perhaps overblown, are we going to get a greater focus on quality of place in development in Greater Manchester town and city centres? I think this is interesting. It relates back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, and I think Angelica was talking about it, which is how to actually streamline the content in the new places for everyone, with sort of some of the local COVID recovery plans that are being built as well at the moment. I wonder, Steve, actually, whether you'd like to answer that one. How important is this, and how easy is it going to be strategically to put those two strategies together?
Well, given the time, the simple answer would be yes, but it's not in my nature to do that. I do think it's going to be important to reflect on how people perceive their lives changing, and I think there is going to be, you've seen it, a trend towards people thinking, well, where were my gardens? My balcony wasn't big enough. How did I get out? People living in small flats, and so I do think there will be a rethink about how society wants to live in the places that we create, and I personally think that's a good thing. I think that's absolutely a good challenge for us to try and create better quality places. But if I can just briefly, the role of members is an interesting one for me, because I see, and Angelica may have a view on this, is that they're a conduit. Sometimes we think about them representing the community in the decision making, and of course they have that role, but they also have a role in carrying the message to the community about why we're doing the things we're doing and why it's important to support X or Y. And I think the conduit role is an important one. And so often I see, and I've worked in public sector all my life, elected members seeing that their role is only to represent the views of their community. And sometimes you have to go the other way and explain to people why the new estate they're living in, there needs to be another one next to them. and I think that's really important. And that will be even more important when we come to look at the COVID world and what do our towns and centres look like. And the high street issue is a big thing. I mean, are our high streets going to still operate the way they used to? Well, I don't think so. I don't think I'm in the doom and gloom camp. I don't think we're going to see, I think Stockton-on-Tees thinking about bulldozing our high street and creating a park. I don't think we're in that territory, but they will change. And I think that, again, my view, I'm always a glass half full person. There are opportunities here to actually create a different place.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. One more. Does the revised plan need to be linked to the Transport for Greater Manchester 2040 strategy to ensure the required growth in housing does not lead to an increase in car usage? I was going to come to Jeremy on that. We might have to bring Councillor Angelica in as well, because obviously whether but Jeremy, generally, do you think what do you think about that transport and housing point?
Very quickly, given the time, but great. The short answer, like Steve, yes. But I think if you're going to have a transport strategy, then when you come out of a train station or a tram stop or whatever it is, or the bus station at a certain place, there has to be a reason to be at that place. So I think you can't divorce transport from the wider issues about urban development, characters, senses of place, and so on. They're all part of the same picture, really. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that does definitely. I mean, Angelica, a sort of yes or no, will this be kind of included in the new places for everyone, a sort of awareness of the 2040 strategy?
Absolutely, and we're making strides. I mean, at the moment, the city centre transport, we are working on a revised city centre transport strategy, which talks about how people across the conurbation will be coming in and out of the city, because I do firmly believe, Steve, I am with you, I'm an optimist. I think people will come back in the city. I think living in the city is still attractive. People want quality green spaces, and we're working on Mayfield, so we've got lots of exciting plans in the city. And transport has to be an integral part, because the strategy is not only about housing, it's about growing the economy across Greater Manchester. It's about ensuring that we've got the right jobs in the right place, and also we've got the right infrastructure to make places for people to live.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I think that's a good place to stop. Got a couple of minutes over. Sorry to go into your coffee break, but I hope that all of this has, well, for one, given Rachel some confidence that your company will be able to do more business in Greater Manchester in the not too distant future. Yeah, a virtual round of applause to our speakers for a really thorough question, and to our attendees for your input. Please do stay on for the networking break, and we'll be back for the second half presentation and panel around 11:25, chaired by Place Northwest publisher Paul Unger. So let's switch to networking mode. Thank you, and see you again very shortly.
Thank you very much for inviting me to the webinar. Fascinating first half. Really struck by the conversation there, and particularly about the joint plan and the need for a joint plan, and perhaps that could be digitally enabled. So I'm going to show you a visualization slide deck of what we're doing at VU.CITY, and how we can possibly help with the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework going forwards, but generally visualization in the plan making process going forwards anyway. And this is about new technology that's come onto the market. VU.CITY is a game-changing technology using game engine technology to bring into the real estate market. And we effectively have started this from creating a digital twin at macro scale, at citywide scale, and then can drill into master plans, borough-wide streets and buildings and individual buildings to help with citywide asset management. And we've developed 20 cities we've modeled around the UK so far, and 5 world cities. And a lot of modeling has gone into that, over 2,500 square kilometers, to an accuracy of 15 centimeters, the model, over 15 million trees and 137 data sets, and many interactions and interactive tools that you can use for design and plan making. And as such, typical data sets such as microclimate and socioeconomic data that you would typically use for plan making, for local plans and for master planning, individual projects. These can be overlaid across the 3D model. And in Manchester, which proud to have 150 square kilometres modelled to date, over 200,000 buildings to an accuracy of 15 centimetres, 635 trees, all accurate to height and canopy width. 8 data layers, we're adding to that as we speak, and 13 interactive design planning tools that you can use. And this is the kind of breakdown of the modelling that we've done so far, making up the 150 square kilometres for Greater Manchester. And recently on board is Rochdale, and now modelling Stockport as well. And an early adopter of this technology is indeed Rochdale themselves, and are using, and many thanks to Neil Eccles, Head of Innovation at Rochdale Development Agency, who's helped champion this technology within the council, and certainly helping for visualization of their town centre redevelopment work, and working with Capital and Centric and other developers to design and articulate what is coming up in terms of development. And of course, Rochdale has been used as a pilot for the place development framework, which can be used across the Greater Manchester area. And large-scale developments that Rochdale are looking at includes the North East Growth Corridor, and how digital models such as VU.CITY can help plan and master plan that. It's a 20-year project, and perhaps using digital technology, this can be actually speeded up over that period. And we'll hear more from Rochdale a little later. And Salford also have been a pioneer in adopting this technology as well. And I just quote from Martin Hodgson here in the planning team, some of the good experiences he has had in terms of helping him to find large-scale developments faster, and enabling him to and his team to assess the impacts quicker on his projects, and also used as a helpful communication tool for meetings and developers and stakeholders alike. And another one from James Ketley, where they've been using it to help assess the scale and mass of large towers in the city, and also being able to have that immersive experience at street level, being able to see what the towers and the buildings will look like at street level using this immersive 3D technology. So quite a few really good pioneers of the technology in the Greater Manchester area, and we see a lot of this around the country now being used for local plan making, consultation using virtual reality, but also particularly in early COVID, virtual planning committees being used using the VU.CITY model to assess sites, and also to help local and area action plans, in particular tall building plans and clusters of tall buildings, to inform council policy and plan making, particularly local area action plans and tall building policy. And large scale intervention areas, regeneration areas, where digital technology can help at least scope the parameters of the buildings at the outset and try to de-risk the project early. So we're seeing more of that uptake and adoption. And likewise for large-scale regeneration projects, housing projects, public-private partnerships, where both the public sector and the private sector and professions designing can all work together using digital tools such as this. And of course, you're able to drop traditional SketchUp models and BIM models into a 3D model and give it human scale and be able to assess it as this typical example shows. And we're also looking at campuses and innovation districts where they are starting to require literally digital twin of their estates going forwards to help with asset management and efficiency and productivity of those estates. Here's an example of how we are looking to help city councils to look at helping them towards, as an example, with solar PV rooftops, helping them towards their net zero climate change targets by assessing rooftops very quickly for daylight and sunlight and solar gain. And also on the bottom right is a good example with the PDR permitted development rights, how you can use technology at scale very quickly to assess, for, in this case, 2-story developments on 3-story residential buildings. And both the assessor, the council, and the promoter, the developer, can actually use this tool to look at impacts from ground level, shading, overshadowing, leaves off trees as well in the winter we can do, and also impacts from local views. But the point being here is you can look at this at scale using digital technology. And we also have what we're calling citizen access, Your View. So we're working with local authorities to look at digitalizing portals, planning portals, and then streaming the information from those planning portals to your phone, and you'll be able to geolocate the impact of particular developments from your street, from your front door, from your favorite cafe, and be able to then comment on those proposals. So perhaps the future of planning portals going forwards. And we work with a lot of companies, other digital companies, in this case, Commonplace Digital, to help with consultation and visualization of the consultation process to make things a lot easier to understand. And I've just dropped a few slides even from Commonplace because I think this is a really important aspect of the digital world in terms of allowing digitalization to be used as far as possible. And it's been now being used in Manchester a lot in this case. Last year, Safe Streets programme was used, and under 2 weeks attracted 10,000 people, 2,500 comments and 8,500 agreements. So really speedy use of technology to get public citizen buy-in. And digital engagement is starting to be the new normal, and starting to show signs of what digital strengths and social proof can do to drive more engagement, and is indeed bringing in younger people, 70% in this case, under the age of 45, participating in their built environment and being able to comment on it. Part of this is all about information, visualization, and consultation to improve cities for all and information. So the use of both digital consultation and visualization has a huge impact. And this is really touching in the plan tech world that we're in now, and the huge growth of digital products and digital services that are helping the built environment. And of course, we can't do this alone. It's an open collaborative platform with a lot of partners that we use. You'll see here Commonplace and GIA and Savills and others all helping towards the promotion and utilization of digital tools. And you can see the MHCLG digital sprint here, the light green concentric circle showing the PropTech, this new marketplace for digital services that interfaces between core platforms and citizens and designers and promoters. And this is how we've placed then VU.CITY as a platform in terms of responding to the planning white paper, to enable that dialogue between planning authorities, development teams and citizens, and create a transparency and trust, a clear communication and a better understanding for those three stakeholders. And this is now happening, and of course this is influencing the planning reforms. These are our 10 digital bullet points as to how digital technology will help the planning reform process. I won't read all these out, but effectively helping to speed up, helping to influence, enabling standardization, ability to assess impacts, driving efficiencies through our industry, both in the private and public sector, maximizing citizen engagement, and of course training and reskilling, not least. So I'll just leave it there as an introduction to the consequence of allowing digital technology to help the plan making process, and particularly at macro scale when we're talking about the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, and the assistance that this can give in terms of developing large regional plans and local plans like we're talking about today. So I'll leave it there and hand it back to Paul. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alex. Yes, a fascinating time as we see technology come into all parts of our lives. If our panelists could activate your cameras and mics now, please. We'll get the second panel underway. Joining us, we have Steve Rumbelow, Chief Executive of Rochdale Council, Russell Drummond, Land Director at Lovell, David Rainford, Head of Property Finance at Cowgills, Karen, Partner at Mills and Reeve, and you've already heard from Alex there, Chief Commercial Officer of VU.CITY. If I could start with you, Steve, if you just explain your role and give us a brief summary of where we're at right now, please.
Yes, Paul. I mean, I'm obviously got a particular interest in Rochdale, but the reason for being here is that I lead supporting Councillor Paul Dennett, Mayor of Salford, on the policy area for GMCA around housing, planning, homelessness and infrastructure. So that's the reason I'm here today. I'm declaring interest whenever I'm speaking about Rochdale, but that's the reason I'm here today. In terms of where we're at with the plan formerly known as GMSF, it's now, of course, as we always have to do with these things, been renamed, Places for Everyone, and we're looking to take that forward. I mean, our position on this really is very clear. The reasons for having this plan and needing this plan in Greater Manchester haven't changed since 2016. It's very much about driving GM's growth. It's supporting, it's fundamental to the Greater Manchester strategy, our people, our place. It's very much about making people can ensure that Greater Manchester is one of the best places in the world for people to grow up, get on and grow old. And that's not changed. And that's all about a good starting life, decent homes, a good job, a modern economy to support that, that's driven by innovation, and none of that's changed. If anything, we need this plan more now than we did back then, because of course what we're now facing is a recovery from a years-long global pandemic, and that means that the things that we needed then amplified by the year we've just had.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Caroline, I just wanted to sort of drill down into some of the implications. And from a legal point of view, when we're talking about planning law and the status of the new plan, how is that going to work with the plan of 9 compared to what would have been GMSF with all 10 agreeing? Oh, if you pop your mic on.
Sorry, try again. The intention is very much that they will pick it up where they left off, I think, with GMSF. And in fact, it will be important for speed that they do that as closely as they possibly can, because what was intended with the GMSF was that originally it was a spatial development framework document, which didn't give them all of the powers in terms of greenbelt release that they wanted to have. So it later evolved into a development plan document, which has a different planning status. And if they get it through as a development plan document, then that means that it can deal with greenbelt release, which, as we all know, is very controversial, but will be an important part of the plan. So the intention for the GMSF was that it would be adopted by all of the 10 then authorities as part of their local development plan. And the plan of the 9 is also intended to be a development plan document, and is intended to go through to pick up where GMSF left off, but it would still need to go through various stages. In fact, there's quite a lot of work still to do, and I think Angeliki said, am I right? I think she said that they wanted to get it agreed by June. Is that what she said? Which this June, I think she said. That seems quite ambitious, given that we're nearly in March and that there are elections, but maybe Steve can tell us if that is going to be possible. But then, of course, there are if there are other processes to go through before it can be adopted. It needs to be agreed between all 9, and there needs to be, they all need, full councils of all of the authorities need to sign off on it. It then needs to be submitted to government. It needs to go through the examination process, and then hopefully it survives that process, and then it can be adopted. So there's quite a lot of work to do to get to that stage still.
Yeah, Steve, do you want to come back in quickly before I?
Yeah, I mean, Carol, I think there is a lot of work to do, but actually a lot of the work has already been done. I mean, to enable us to start from Regulation 19, from the point at which we were back in the summer, so the final draft, if you like, the plan has got to effectively, in legal terms, have substantially the same effect on the remaining 9 as the plan originally did. Now, so that will mean that a lot of what we already, well, most of what we've already done in terms of evidence-based work will still hold good. There has been some change, of course, because just before Christmas, the government released new housing need methodology, which included a very significant uplift in the housing requirements for urban centres, particularly cities. So Manchester had an uplift of 35%, and that's having to be worked through, but we're confident we can get there. And of course, a lot of the people focus on some of the more difficult areas of the plan, like greenbelt release. But most of the homes are not on greenbelt. This is very much a brownfield plan. And the strategic policies that underpinned it actually commanded widespread support in the last consultation. So things around zero carbon development, affordable housing, space and accessibility standards. So there's an awful lot of good stuff that people were very upbeat about. So we're very confident that we can get the work done and that we can get it approved and out for that final stage of consultation in the summer. Just to, Caroline did say that it needs to go to all the full councils. It's actually, in legal terms, my understanding is it doesn't need to, but the leaders of the councils are very clear that they want to do that, and they've been clear on that for quite some time. So their intention is that that will happen again with this plan of 9.
Okay, thank you. And David, at Cowgills, what message does all this delay and indecision give to the market?
Well, I mean, funders, broadly, I think it's a common sense statement. Funders always like certainty. You've obviously got those funders who will take speculative positions with developers on larger sites, strategic sites, probably those that are in Greenbelt and with opportunity to get those released. But, moving on from the certainty which you've not got in those situations, they'd like some form of line of sight of success. What we've had because of what's gone on with the plan and Stockport exiting is we've now got a further period of uncertainty, which I suspect is probably, colouring some of the judgment of some of the more strategic developers in terms of their views as to whether those plans that they have on the table are going to be deliverable. There is also a danger that some transactions may therefore get pushed back, and God forbid there may be some consequence on underlying land prices if we don't have some clarity. I think a number of players would have seen some positives, or a lot of positives, in terms of what was proposed in the plan, in terms of Greenbelt release, but that's sort of been thrown up a little bit into the air at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Russell, at Lovell, what's been the impact on the market, would you say, of the drawn out process over the last 5-6 years?
From a sort of sales market perspective, we've seen quite an increase in sales values, which obviously has some positive effects in terms of making land and sites more viable, but obviously sort of created a bit more of a shift in focus depending on what sort of market sector you operate in, and sort of like basically looking at development outside of GMSF whilst sort of political uncertainty continues with the plan. Yeah.
Is that something that you've had to do yourselves and look elsewhere?
Yeah. I think a lot of developers are the same, and Rachel Ainscoe mentioned it, that the focus has been looking elsewhere. Well, for most developers, probably around the other sort of conurbations in the northwest, where there's a little bit more certainty on what's coming forward. And it's been quite a long time, the process in the GMSF, and obviously it's now its successor in the making, really, and it's just caused a bit of a hiatus, really, in terms of what's happening around GMSF.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, are you
No,
acknowledging
that? I mean, clearly this is the right plan for Greater Manchester, and we need it. There's no question about that in my mind. We've got to get this done. But what I've seen from the development industry is not what Russell's just described. And indeed, Russell's company is one of the companies that's doing a lot of development in Greater Manchester, and somewhere in Rochdale too. I think this is a plan, a spatial plan of the scale that actually no one in the country has done yet. So it was always going to be quite tough, but we're doing it this way because it's the right way to do it, because companies like the companies on this call don't recognise municipal boundaries. And some of the sites that we're trying to deal with, I mean, just being a bit parochial for a second, one of the benefits of this plan is speaks directly to Greater Manchester's commitment to balance up GM better and to boost northern competitiveness. And the site that's doing most of that is very much of interest to me and to a number of businesses, a number of developers on this conference. And that's the Northern Gateway, and that's a strategic employment site, the biggest employment site in this plan. It's the first time that the biggest strategic employment site will be in the north of the conurbation. It's a site that is of a scale, something like 1.2 million square meters of employment space, that is of not just regional but national significance. So it is taking a while because it's a big plan. I mean, people have heard me joke about this before, but one of my favourite quotes is from a guy called Burnham, not Mayor Burnham, but an architect that was responsible for rebuilding Chicago after the fire. And he said, make no little plans. And that's what we're doing. We are not making a little plan. This is a big plan that will stir people's hearts and get the development industry interested. And they are. You know, I just don't recognise what Russell's just said. People are frustrated by the time it's taking, as am I, but we will get there, and there will be a massive demand for the opportunities that are created by this. It's very much about the ambitions for Greater Manchester to be the best that it can possibly be.
Yeah, please, Caroline.
I'll turn my microphone back on this time. I know I just wanted to say that I'm afraid that my experience of talking to my clients, it matches Russell's rather than Steve's. And that I have actually, you know, clients have been saying to me that they are avoiding Greater Manchester in terms of, you know, okay, I'm delighted that that's not the same as your experience, Steve, but clients are saying to me that and I'm talking about strategic planning, you know, strategic land, bringing sites which take a long time to make work. Sites which take a lot of early investment, a lot of spending at risk by developers, promoters, to put the sites together, to do the deals with landowners, to make access work, and all of the other, you know, all of the other stuff that goes into it. They are looking outside of Greater Manchester because that's high risk spending that they have to put in. So I don't disagree that we need a plan, but I think unfortunately the delay has been working against the driving growth, and it has taken people's attention outside of GM.
Yeah, and obviously the backdrop, the economic context in which this is now being put forward is a very different one to 5-6 years ago. We've now got the pandemic. We've got even more of a squeeze on resources in local authorities. Are panelists confident that there is the resource there in planning departments within councils to take this forward effectively?
No. Is the short answer to that. I think planning departments have been under-resourced for a long time. I think, and that's not the fault of the local authorities, because they've had to, you know, they don't have enough money to spend on lots of things. But no, I don't. I think they've lost out. They lose people to the private sector. I think the planning departments would benefit from having more people who can be proactive with planning rather than reactive. Resourcing within planning is an issue for developers.
I mean, resourcing of planning is a difficulty. You know, local government's had 10 years of austerity, and that's not been easy. But I'm confident that we will find a way. And just going back to the earlier point, I mean, this is somewhat skewed, of course, by the last 12 months. But if you look at the data on growth, it doesn't support the idea that people are not interested in investing in Greater Manchester. And let's remember, of this pipeline of land is not greenbelt land. So the greenbelt release is massively important and always was. and we've worked hard to reduce that to make sure that we're taking people with us on it. But a lot of this development is on sites that are brownfield sites and might be difficult to develop, but they're difficult to develop in any event. It's not the plan that's making them difficult to develop, and they are developable now.
But surely we would have had more growth if the plan was in place.
We would have been 2 or 3 years potentially ahead of where we are now. And some of these sites are of a scale that means that they wouldn't be built out. You know, you've got to remember, this is a plan to 2037. This is not this is a big plan, a long-term plan, and that's what the development community want and need, and it's what we need in terms of developing Greater Manchester in a way that we maximise its potential and ensure that people have better lives, some of the best lives in Northern England by living and working here.
Yeah, David.
Yeah,
do you want to come in?
I mean, I don't disagree that we need a plan, and we need cooperation. And obviously, part of the aim of this plan is to provide more certainty for developers in terms of bringing forward proposals, and also to remove the politics out of some of the decision making. Hopefully, the problem is that the politics are getting in the way of achieving the aim at the moment. To the mainstream developer, now here I talk about an SME developer, not large strategic sites. There is very little interest in the GMSF at the moment. They have far more challenging things to deal with in terms of the current planning system, in terms of delays, in terms of resource, in terms of political decisions. With the whole point, obviously one of the thrusts of the plan was to avoid development by appeal, but there has to be something done a lot sooner than the plan the plan timescales, because it is frustrating a lot of developers on the ground. And I agree entirely with what Russell and Caroline are saying.
Yeah, Russell, you waiting patiently to put your
it
pen up
wasn't
to come in?
there was no criticism of a plan-led system. I think we're all in favour of that. It's I guess it's just a degree of scepticism now of how and when this might actually deliver on its aims, and in terms of providing certainty of what's coming forward. And in that intervening time, it is better to look elsewhere, where more shorter, medium term projects, you've got a bit more confidence on where you can develop, and that's the focus of the industry. It tends to be more short, medium term, really.
Yeah, and generally, I mean, we've touched on bits of the planning white paper, but does that offer some hope when that comes through, if and when, that things like the digital planning, but also the zonal areas where there's a presumption in favour of outline planning without having to go through a full process, the changes to local plan, abbreviating, trying to speed that up, and more intervention to get those to happen. Is that something that the panel think will actually happen, and is going to improve the outlook for developers? Does anybody want to comment on that?
I think, as always, the devil will be in the detail, won't it? And I think, on a positive note, and if we look at, how various authorities reacted during the pandemic. If we take Manchester as an example, they did something very positive. 3 months during lockdown, they got a quorum of a team to make decisions on planning, and a lot will probably say decisions were made quicker. I think there is far more that can be done to remove the subjectivity out of the process, which is the key barrier to a lot of schemes being brought forward, and down the line, then you end up with appeal and a costly bill for the taxpayer. Things like 106s, 3 months to get a 106 invariably becomes 12 months. The developer cannot carry. There's a holding cost for a developer, and that is therefore preventing them moving on to another scheme and ultimately delaying development.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to pick up on that because I think with all of this, clearly the developers need to be confident in being able to deliver their projects in a timely timescale, and therefore will pick the least resistant land and councils to deal with. So, but I do think back to the kind of the scale of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, it's so enormous, and as Steve says, it's not really been done before. I mean, we've got the same issues we're going to have the same issues at Oxford-Cambridge corridor, same issues with large-scale developments like Old Oak Common in London, where these things take a long time to do, and I think in the meantime, things need to still carry on and happen, and in terms of Rochdale, they are still getting on doing their town centre redevelopment and work there. The planning reform white paper, again, that's going to take some time to unwind, but I do think there is a positive stream through that, which is the digital element, which is all about providing evidence, providing information quicker and easier so that we can make our plans, whether we're the public sector doing plan making work or private sector trying to assess projects. So I do think the digital agenda is strong, and will help to speed processes up.
Is that more pressure on resources? We've already heard about austerity and the squeeze on resources. Is that a very expensive thing for people to implement and train up and maintain?
I think it is. I think everybody's struggling in terms of resourcing, and is a huge amount of kind of skill, retraining and skilling to be had across the industry for this. But there is definitely signs of take up and adoption, both in the public sector and the private sector. During COVID lockdown, things have been progressing. We're all having our project meetings on these sorts of calls. We're using digital technology to progress. So we have progressed the whole digital agenda, definitely. I see that as only positive going forwards. The piece on citizen engagement is very important to make sure that we bring them along with that journey. Some people obviously don't have access to digital technology, but also we've seen that actually a lot more younger people are engaged in the plan making process through digital technology. So there's pluses and minuses there, but it will come out in the wash, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve, any thoughts on that planning reform regime that could be making some radical changes, and how that might thread through the Places for Everyone Plan of 9?
Well, I think as the change, as David said, the devil will be in the detail, but the Plan of 9, the current timetable for that, means that we're trying to get it under the wire. In some ways, what we don't want is to have to respond with our new plan, Places for Everyone. We don't want to have to change that as a result of new planning regulations, because that's still further, of course. So the intention is to meet the government's current target to have plans in place by 2023, and the timetable we've got at the moment delivers against that. It's really important that we move this forward and at pace, and try and ensure that this time we do get it over the line and get it done. Don't get me wrong, I understand people's frustration with the planning process, but everyone knows the planning process is not always as slick as it could be. If the white paper does improve that'll be great. I mean, one thing that has happened, I suppose, already, the introduction of the local housing needs formula, that in itself will help a lot, because it removes, at a strategic planning level, it removes some of the arguments around the numbers. The numbers are the numbers, and that does make things a little bit easier, I think. However unpopular it is amongst some people.
Yeah, we've had a question from the audience about, is it time to detach plan making from conflicted local politics? Obviously, we've got the election coming up, 6th of May, which could change things again. Views on that, Steve, and then the rest of the
well,
panel?
I work in local government because I believe in local democracy, and that sometimes can be awkward and difficult, but the benefits far outweigh the negatives, is my personal view. And of course, the statutory bodies for signing off these plans are local authorities, and there's no proposals to change that. The white paper doesn't go anywhere near that. It just tries to smooth some of the processes. And unfortunately, we've all had experience of planning regulation changes that have been designed to make the processes smoother that haven't really done that. And that's not down to local authorities, is it?
No. Caroline, would you detach plan making from politics?
Well, I suppose the advantage of, you could look at in terms of what the white paper is talking about, in terms of centrally set housing delivery numbers. You could look at that as a positive and potentially an upside, because it will take away some of the local politics. I mean, one of the issues around a lot of the issues around GMSF is political, isn't it? There are there are no votes in development. There are, it's not. I don't think anybody goes to the polls saying that they're going to let lots of planning applications through. So it will remove some of that. Local authorities won't have to justify the numbers because they will have been imposed. So you could look at that as a positive. On the other hand, though, if essentially it feels like there's a long way between central government setting numbers and what local authorities knowing what's going on and what their area actually needs and can accommodate. So yes, I think generally there is a perception, certainly amongst developers, that local plans, the GMSF, the Plan of 9, it's all too political.
Yeah, and affordability has been put into that housing need formula now, and yet we're hearing a situation where supply has been constrained because of the doubts that have remained for these last few years. Russell, you mentioned about land values going up, and surely that plays through to inflation for houses, for units as well. Is that your experience?
Well, it is, and we're a partnerships developer, so we'll build across a number of different tenures, and probably the influence of lack of supply has been sales values going up, and in terms of probably picking up the point on that leveling up agenda, it's pushed out certain tenures, and when values are getting over, pushing over £300 a square foot, it is introducing exclusion amongst some, especially probably the younger generation, really, which is kind of going against what the sort of current, well, certainly what we need in terms of coming out of this COVID situation, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So only making the housing crisis worse. But what will happen, Steve, to local plans now? Are they going to be produced alongside the Plan of 9?
I mean, one of the challenges, of course, is that a number of authorities have got very, very old plans and effectively don't have current plans. 3 out of the 9 are in that position. It's really important that that's another drive, really, to make sure that this time around the plan is put in place, because it means that there will be an effective plan for them. Some councils are looking at sort of developing a local plan alongside GMSF, as was the Places for Everyone plan. Doesn't really make much sense, because you can make it will be a better plan done as a plan across a number of councils. There's still the duty to cooperate within the legislation, of course, so that would have to happen anyway. But this is just a much better way of doing it, that to as far as we can, ignores local authority boundaries and tries to do things that make sense cross-boundary where that's the right thing to do. So doing it this way means that the local plan concerns that individual authorities have are lessened, as long as we get it completed, as long as we get it adopted.
Yeah, absolutely. And David, are you feeling more optimistic as you picture the end point here, if all goes well by the end of the year?
I mean, I think it is. You know, the sooner that this comes into play, the better. Obviously, as been mentioned, we've got elections next year, and if we don't get things moving this year, we're then potentially in a bit of a stalemate situation. I think the message is, I'll pick up something that Steve Quartermain said. He said, you know, councils should be more of a conduit. And I think that is a really important thing. The whole point of the Plan of 9 is that this is for the greater good of all the areas. And I think if they go into the discussions with that spirit, hopefully we can prevent the politics that cause the issues in December, railroad knocking us off the rails again.
Yeah, absolutely. And just a note to the audience to please do get involved in the Q&A section again, and put your questions to the panel. Steve, were you about to come back in there? I'll just pop your mic back on, sorry.
Just to clarify, timetable wise, it won't be done by December. It will be submitted, is the plan, by December. But of course, we are then there's then the planning process that is out of our hands. There's then the public examination in public to go through. So it's probably going to be a year later by the time the plan is adoptable. So just to be clear about what that timetable is, but the timetable that we're in control of takes us through to effectively submission at the end of this year. And I think it's interesting. What people need to recognise is that, I mean, people talk blithely about it's very political. Well, it's political is about people, and this is not a universally popular plan. The politicians involved in this, the lead politicians, see this as the right thing for Greater Manchester. But they also think it's really important to take as many people on this journey as possible with us, because it's about engaging with communities and then being part of this. They are Greater Manchester.
Yeah. So does that lead to, and there's a question here from Jeremy Hines, is the answer then to extend public participation and find new ways to involve groups across all sectors and make the plan making more accessible?
In the white paper does obviously speak to that, doesn't it? It does have some mechanisms to try and do that. All I would say is that's been tried before and not really worked. So. Okay.
And when it comes to the plan, will it be a rewritten plan, or will it be just taking Stockport out of the GMSF? And talk us through some of the mechanics of how it's going to work.
Process-wise, as Caroline was alluding to earlier, if it looks a very different plan, then we will have to go back further into the process. We'd have to start at an early consultation stage. But why would it look like a substantially different plan? We were very happy with the plan that was put together and put out for consultation last summer, and therefore we expect it to be a plan that doesn't look that different, that is largely having the same effect on the 9, just taking into account taking out Stockport and adding in the housing needs change, housing numbers changes that that need to be made largely as a result of Manchester's numbers going up significantly. So it will look very similar. And as I said earlier, the policies that underpin it, the pages and pages that people probably won't have even read of policies that underpin it, were very popular in that consultation stage. So why would we change those underpinning policies that pick up on things like affordable housing and indeed social housing?
And some people have commented that if it was those fundamental chapters about the approach, rather than getting into the specifics on site allocation, because the allocation section is half the document, that it would have been a safer, smoother passage. And what do you say to that? Was it too constrained by naming specific sites and the allocations?
Well, it would have been very unpopular with the people on this call had it been that. As Caroline was saying earlier, we could have done well, in fact, there was a point at which we were hoping we could do it as an SDS, but the reality is that wouldn't allow us to release Greenbelt, so it wouldn't be the complete plan. So, for example, the massive employment site I've just talked about wouldn't be released by an SDS plan. It can only be, and we did think the government were going to change the regulations and would allow us to do an SDS, a more a strategic mayor's plan, if you like, rather than a development plan. But those regulations never got changed. So my view is very simple. We need a plan. We always knew we would need Greenbelt as part of this plan to do what we need to do growth-wise. And there was clearly a lot of concern about that. And I think the reduction in Greenbelt in the original 2016 version was about 8% reduction. In the plan, that version we published last summer, that was significantly reduced down to 3.1% reduction, I think it was. So, you know, this is not a big Greenbelt take. In the scheme of things, we're not talking about a lot of Greenbelt. And so we're saying that effectively Greater Manchester now has, as we speak, is about 47, just under 47% Greenbelt. It'll go down to 45% Greenbelt if this plan goes through as we envisage it. And that will protect a lot of Greenbelt up until 2037, if you think about it that way. We're talking about between now and 2037, reducing overall Greenbelt in Greater Manchester by 2 to 3%. You know, anyone, and giving us the growth that we need in that period to make the place we want it to be. It's a win-win, in my view.
Paul, can I just say? I mean, I think well, I have two responses to that. Personally, I think that Greenbelt as an entire topic needs to be looked at afresh. I think that it is an incredibly emotive issue, and in some cases more so than it ought to be, that some Greenbelt land isn't actually as lovely as some people might think it is. I also think that there is room to well, first of all, I think the continued holding on to the green belt causes all sorts of anomalies with house prices across different areas, with commuting, with transport, with puts pressures in particular places. So I think that it could that we need to look again at the green belt, or the green belts that we have in the country, and consider whether that needs to be elements of that do need to be developed on, because if all of the pressure from these housing numbers comes into say Manchester, and Manchester was going to, under GMSF, was going to take more than its share, I believe, Manchester and Salford. What I don't think is happening, if there's going to be much denser population, what I don't think is happening is that all of the services that go with where you live is keeping up with the pressure on increasing numbers. as far as I'm aware, and I think last time I heard from Joanne Roney on the subject, there are no plans to build any schools in central Manchester, yet we're expecting that more people will live there. You know, so how do those two things fit together is my concern. Those sorts of facilities, how do you keep people or attract people into the city? The pandemic will definitely have had an impact on that. I'm being told by house builders that they certainly, you know, in terms of their smaller, cheaper houses are becoming much more appealing because people think they'll swap a flat for a house now, please, with a garden. So if we want to expect the cities, the already, you know, built up areas to take more housing, the services have to go with it. There has to be some green space, surely. A few more trees would be nice. Things like, you know.
Well, yeah, there's a sort of allied question to that from Michael Vivona at Social on about infrastructure. You know, things are changing, and we are seeing talk of redesigning the places that we live and work in. And he asked, the pandemic will have a lasting impact on town centres, with workspaces becoming areas for collaboration, and infrastructure needs shifting. And schools, as you could say, as infrastructure, transport as infrastructure, it can mean lots of things. How can the GMSF or the plan adapt to those changing needs? Steve, did you want to have a word on that?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, I mean, Caroline's absolutely right. There are a lot of, but these are all national policies, of course. These are all things that are down to the government of the day to look at, not local authorities. And at the moment, the mechanism for release of Greenbelt is a plan, and that's what we're doing. That's available to us, and so we're pursuing that solution. It is undoubtedly the case that when we're engaging with communities on this kind of strategic planning, that one of the things that makes it difficult is the fact that we can't describe clearly our ability to deliver infrastructure that required to develop out to site, and that is a problem. That's been, you know, we've got a peculiar system in the UK PLC, haven't we, where the Department for Transport assess infrastructure needs by looking at how many people would use the infrastructure, and they look at a vacant site and say, well, there's nobody there to use this infrastructure, so we can't fund it. Well, that's utter nonsense, isn't it? And that's not how it should work. It should be about building the infrastructure to facilitate the developments, not the other way around. So that is one of the difficulties in the planning process, which is not about planning per se. It's about the ability to convince people that you have the wherewithal to put, because at the moment, of course, it's relying largely on developers being able to fund a lot of that infrastructure. Too much of it, arguably, I would say. Whereas what we should be doing as public authorities is having the wherewithal to understand the split between infrastructure that developers should properly pay for and infrastructure that's much more strategic that we should be putting in. And that is undoubtedly one of the biggest difficulties with a plan of this nature.
Alex, yeah.
Can I just come in there? Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, any plan needs to be founded on infrastructure and social amenity, absolutely. And we're seeing this across all cities. And I wanted to pick up on Caroline's point, because I kind of tend to agree. Of all our cities that we've modelled around the country, you know, the amount of towers and the amount of development going on in Manchester is huge, actually. And all the yellow and blue buildings that you see, which are planning consents and buildings that are being built, is actually quite tremendous, what's going on in central Manchester anyway. And what we've seen, but I have kind of got the feel as well that there is not the appropriate social infrastructure, social amenity that goes with that, something that needs to be addressed, I think, going forwards in the plan. But maybe just to end on a positive note, just to say, you know, the amount of development that we see, because we obviously track all the planning applications, consents, and those that are being built to put into our model, it is one of the busiest cities in the country, and I think that's endorsed by the Deloitte Crane Survey as well. You know, there's more cranes going on in Manchester than any other city, so that's the positive bit from me. But yeah, back to the plan making.
Okay, thank you. And just as we wrap up, Russell, interested if you sort of cast your eye forward a year or two now, from what you've heard, will you be going back to the board at Lovell and saying, right, we need to re-engage, and Greater Manchester's looking like it's sorting its act out, and we're going to make plans again in the business plan? Oh, try again.
Hello, sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, we've never not wanted to look around Greater Manchester, and I didn't mean to put that point across. If it looks like there's more certainty, and if it looks like the actual process is moving forward at the pace that's being suggested, then yes, of course. It's a case of just, we've got the proof is in the pudding of it actually happening, really, and things moving forward.
Yeah, you've got to see the results. And similar question to you, David. Will you be passing back positive noises to your clients?
I think that this is all about confidence now, and demonstrating that there is a will with the remaining 9 to move this forward, and to actually deliver on what has been sort of promised, as it were, for several years. And if we, the whole point of the plan is it is for the greater good of all those authorities within it, and the parties who are driving that. I just hope that they get on board with that sentiment, and put the greater good behind political self-interest, because politics will always be there in this process. But as Steve says, there is an opportunity to do something good for Greater Manchester, and I just hope the parties, deliver on that now and quickly.
Yeah, and Caroline, final word with the same sort of question. Is going away any more positive than before?
Yeah, well, I mean, the sooner the better, as far as developers and promoters and any agents are concerned. Yeah, so hoping that the plan doesn't need to change. Hope, as Dave said, that everyone is on board to get it done as quickly as possible. And I think keep us posted, Steve, as much as you can. Tell us how well it's going, and then developers and land promoters can start to spend money on DM sites again.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for giving your time and your input this morning. A really fascinating session, after a great one in the first half as well. I think we covered a heck of a lot of ground this morning, and been very, very useful and interesting to hear from everybody. As well as the market intel, there's still networking. We'll keep the other room open for half an hour. You can get around the tables and see people. Thanks again to our wonderful sponsors today, to Savills, to Cowgills, Kratos and VU.CITY. The next Place Northwest event is next Thursday, 4th of March, all about decarbonising property. Another big and fascinating subject. Details on the website of how you can register to join us for that one. So without further ado, we'll go back in for networking, but the sun is out, the daffodils are out, and spring is in the air, and hopefully we've got light at the end of the tunnel for GMSF in whatever shape and form. We see that coming through. So a very positive day all round, I think. Thank you.